In this video, we'll cover REST APIs, REST web services. So in this video series, you're going to learn how to create REST APIs, web services with Spring. We'll also discuss REST concepts, JSON and HTTP messaging. We'll also look at how to install the REST client tool, Postman. And then we'll develop REST APIs, web services with the @REST controller. And then finally, we'll build a CRUD interface to the database using Spring REST. And we'll spread this out over multiple videos coming up. Now, the main focus here is that we want to focus on practical results. So this is really just an introduction to Spring REST development. The important thing here is that it's not an A to Z reference. For that, you can see the Spring reference manual. So let's look at the business problem. What are we trying to solve? So we want to build a client application to provide the weather report for a city. And so we need to get the weather data from an external service. Like we don't have a local database of weather information because it changes all the time, right? So we need to get that from an external service. So looking at the application architecture, we'll have this My Weather app. That's an app that we're creating. So this is kind of like the client application. And then we'll have this weather service. It's an external service that's provided by some third party. So that's kind of like the back-end server. And what we'll do with our weather app is that we'll simply pass over a string for the city, and then this weather service will return back with the actual weather report. Okay, so that's the architecture, but you may have some questions like, well, okay, how will we connect to the weather service? And then also, what programming language do we use? And then, what's the data format? Is it CSV? Is it XML? Is it some other weird format? All right, so let's get some answers to the questions here. Let's start with the first one here. How will we connect to the weather service? Well, we can make REST API calls over HTTP. So REST stands for the Representational State Transfer. It's really just a lightweight approach for communicating between applications. Then the next question, as far as what programming language do we use? Well, REST is language independent. So the client application can use any programming language, and the server application can use any programming language. So it's totally up to you as far as which language that you'll use for your application. And this is actually a really good thing because this gives us flexibility on the actual implementation on the client side and also on the server side. Now, the next question, what is the data format? Well, REST applications can use any data format. So you'll commonly see XML and JSON, with JSON being the most popular because it's modern. JSON stands for the JavaScript object notation. We'll see a small example of JSON here in this video set, and then in the following video, I'll talk a bit more about the JSON syntax. So a possible solution is that we can use openweathermap.org. So they basically have a weather API that you can use. They give you documentation on how to use it. The data is available in JSON, XML, or HTML format. To call this weather service, the API documentation gives you some information. So it says pass in the city name. So you can go to openweathermap.org. You can pass in the city name, or you can pass in the actual city name, comma, the country code, because you may have a very common city name. So you'll say, hey, this city in this given country or whatever. And then you'll actually get the weather report. That's the response here. So the weather service is going to respond with the JSON. So they'll basically respond back with the temperature, the temp min, max, humidity, the name of the city, and so on. And this is really just a condensed version of the actual weather report. But notice here it's being passed back as JSON. So JSON is really just a collection of name value pairs, and then your application can parse this string and then process on it accordingly. Now, the really nice thing about making use of this approach with this REST API or REST web service is that this weather service that was developed by that one group, Open Weather Map, they simply provide the data feed. So they're the external service. And then you can have different types of clients that can access it. So I could maybe create a client application using Spring MVC, Java, accessing this application, or I could make use of maybe a C# application talking to this weather service. And also I could maybe build an iPhone app using Swift communicating with this weather service. So again, remember, the REST calls can be made over HTTP, and also REST is language independent. So it doesn't really care what language that you're using. As long as you can process the data being passed back, then everything's A-OK. And like I mentioned earlier, that's a very good benefit. So it gives you flexibility on the actual implementation language.